Chris, I'm glad you played that piece from that J.D. Vance speech. I've been obsessed with that for a very long time, literally declaring the universities are the enemy. I'm not sure that anybody, I'm not sure the population at large grokked the task that he was setting out for the administration at that point.
Yeah, and I think they're going after what is one of the great exceptional things about this country, and there's going to be a lot of damage if they succeed.
Yeah. Yes, they're coming from a very, very radical place, and it is a very valuable thing that they're coming for. Yeah. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated. And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Really happy to have you here. You know what tomorrow is? Tomorrow is Friday Eve, which means you're almost there. You're going to make it. Trust me. Do you know Roz Chast, the cartoonist? Roz Chast does cartoons for the New Yorker magazine, and she has forever. She's been doing that since the 1970s. Roz Chast also wrote a fantastic book that I read a decade ago that has stuck with me ever since. It's cartoons. It's written in her style and in her art form, which is cartoons, but it's a memoir. It's about her parents aging into their late 90s and all the crazy decisions or the lack of decisions that made their lives and her life as their daughter such a mess as they got really old. It's this very serious book, but told through cartoons. It's really good. It has stuck with me for a decade. It also has the perfect title, which is, Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? Anyway, needless to say, I'm a big Roz Chast fan, and I have been my whole adult life. And one of Roz Chast's cartoons that I keep thinking about all the time in this news environment that we are living in right now is this one. And she has done several cartoons on this theme of Venn diagrams, right? You got two circles and they overlap, and the overlap is usually where the joke is. But in this one, it's a Venn diagram, and on the left, the circle is labeled fun, and on the right, the circle is labeled boring. And in the Venn diagram overlap between fun and boring, that's Bob. Hi, Bob, who is fun and boring. I think about that all the time. The version of this that I keep in my head in this news environment, though there's a slight difference, though. The overlap isn't between boring and fun, as it is in the original. The overlap that I keep in my head is between boring and scary. Boring stories, scary stories. And there's one particular story that lives right in that overlap that I think about every day. It is the story of Donald Trump's return to the presidency that keeps popping up for me right there. It is unrelentingly boring and unrelentingly scary in equal measure. And I have thought about this story every day since it broke. And it is developing now. This is a story out of the federal prosecutor's office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. If you have been following the news about the rule of law in the Justice Department under Donald Trump, you have noticed that a lot of bizarre stuff has been happening in that prosecutor's office ever since Donald Trump installed a guy there who wasn't January 6th. And now Trump has named him acting U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. His name is Ed Martin. And for at least some of the time that Ed Martin has been there, he was attempting to practice law in Washington, D.C. as the acting U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., despite the fact that he was not a member of the bar in D.C. in good standing. In one case, he wrote to a judge on behalf of the Justice Department, telling the judge to drop the charges against a particular defendant. In so doing, Ed Martin did not mention that he personally was also the defense attorney for that individual defendant. So he's the lawyer on both sides of that case? You can't do that. Ed Martin is the guy who said he wanted to open a criminal investigation into Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer and apparently tried to do so. Ed Martin is the guy who has sent off typo-ridden, bizarre, threatening letters to at least two other Democratic members of Congress, Congressman Robert Garcia and Congressman Eugene Vindman. Ed Martin is the guy who has posted bizarre, like pseudo-legal fan letters to Elon Musk on Twitter, like this one, where he scratched out the typewritten address and wrote in by hand, "Dear Elon." Dear Elon, after your referral As is my practice, I will begin an inquiry. In case you're wondering, no, that is not how prosecutors' offices are supposed to work. But just catch the flavor here a little bit of this thing. Quote, please let me reiterate again. Reiterate again, really. Please let me reiterate again. If people are discovered to have broken the law or even acted simply unethically, we will investigate them and, all bold letters, we will chase them to the end of the earth to hold them accountable. We will not rest or cease in this. Noon is above the law. Noon. That's actually what he wrote. Noon is above the law. Get me noon. So things have been a little crazy at the top federal prosecutor's office in Washington, D.C. Even separate and apart from them firing all the career prosecutors and all the other things they've done, things have just been a little bit nuts at the top federal prosecutor's office in Washington, D.C. under Donald Trump. Noon! Noon! But when it comes to the overlap of scary and boring, not fun and boring, hi Bob, but scary and boring, when it comes to that particular story out of this office, the thing that has happened at this one prosecutor's office that I think about every day is a story about them freezing a bank account, freezing a bunch of money in a Citibank account. And I know each of those syllables is more boring than the last. It's like impossible to even hold on to it in your head for a moment. Freezing a Citibank account, why do I care? You know, part of the reason you could tell this was a really big deal when it first emerged is because it led to the shock resignation of the top criminal division lawyer in that prosecutor's office. She basically laid out when she resigned what had happened there. And in non-legalese, what it boiled down to is that Ed Martin, the Trump-appointed prosecutor, the guy who was at January 6th, who's now running that office, Martin appears to have ordered her to bring a criminal investigation when she said there was no evidence of a crime. Ed Martin, head prosecutor at that office appointed by Trump, told her to bring a criminal investigation. She said, no, there's no crime. You can't open a criminal investigation without evidence of a crime. He insisted. She resigned. She said publicly why she was resigning, to her credit. Ed Martin then tried to get another prosecutor's office to do it. They refused on the same grounds. Then Ed Martin himself said, okay, I'll do it. He has no background as a prosecutor, which is sometimes obvious in the way he behaves, even in court. In this case, he went to a judge saying, this is my criminal investigation for which I need a warrant to go seize that bank account. The judge said no. The judge said no. Hey, there is no probable cause that any crime has been committed here. No, you cannot have it. Nevertheless, somehow, the FBI and then the Treasury Department were enlisted in this caper, and they leaned on the bank. And the people whose funds were in that bank were denied their funds. They somehow pushed this through anyway. That's how they froze that bank account. And in itself, that sounds boring. But because of the way they did it, this seemingly boring thing is also the opening chapter of a very scary dystopian novel in which the government is seizing your phone records, obtaining all of your text messages and your emails and your iCloud, and maybe raiding your house and raiding your office, and they are taking or freezing the contents of your bank account when there is no probable cause that you have committed a crime. Because what there is a federal prosecutor's office that will do that stuff anyway, even when their own career prosecutors and a judge tell them there's no crime here, you can't do it. So like I said, this is, I recognize this seems like a boring story in terms of all the proper nouns involved here, right? But it is scary in terms of what this means. And I think about this case every day. And now we have had two important developments here. First of all, number one, they are in trouble in court now because of this case. A federal court has just ruled that nothing here seems kosher. Of Quote, there are serious due process concerns and questions of whether defendants' actions were arbitrary, capricious, an abuse of discretion, otherwise not in accordance with law, contrary to statute, or unsupported by substantial evidence. Quote, there are procedures that must be followed. Quote, defendants vaguely reference multiple ongoing investigations, but offer no specific information about such investigations, factual support for the decision, or an individualized explanation for each plaintiff. This is insufficient. Quote, defendants have not provided the credible evidence required. Quote, vague and unsubstantiated assertions are insufficient. So that's the first thing. This one boring, scary story that I think about every single day is now finally getting turned back by the courts, at least for now. Those funds are being reinstated into that bank account. And whether or not you care about that bank account being restored, whether or not you care about all the, frankly, boring particulars of this case, what is important here is that this one quite bananas prosecutor's office, for the moment, they have been stopped from doing the one thing that they were trying to get away with that really does afford the possibility of Trump just opening the floodgates against Democrats, protesters, journalists, government officials, potentially judges. They have finally been stopped, at least for the moment, from doing something that I think, if they were able to do this, might reasonably result in a lot of people actually fleeing this country in very short order. So they have been held up on that by federal court in Washington. But I said there were two things that have happened on this case. Here's the other thing. I mentioned that there was a big sort of splashy resignation when this all came into the public eye. That prosecutor, the head of the criminal division, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., career prosecutor, very well respected, not at all a partisan, right? Not somebody who they had they had it out for, who was seen as like some, one of Trump's targets. Not a person like that at all. She resigned rather than play a part. She resigned rather than, frankly, gin up a criminal prosecution where she said there was no evidence of any crime. When she resigned and explained in a letter what had happened, we public got to see what was happening. Wow, scary. But the other thing that happened is then her job became vacant and they replaced her in that job. There is a new person who is now the head of the criminal division at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. And now we know what the new person who they put in that job has been doing. And surprise, he is apparently doing exactly the kind of thing his predecessor refused to do and resigned over. So we've been covering the story of this little agency, a nonprofit created by Congress during the Reagan era. It's called the U.S. Institute of Peace. They're a small agency. They operate independent of the U.S. government. Their building is not a U.S. government building. They own it and operate it themselves. U.S. Institute of Peace, if you care, their basic remit is to try to stop conflicts around the world from metastasizing into wars. Non-controversial, non-big agency in Washington. Again, and essentially an independent nonprofit created by Congress, but they are their own thing. They're outside the U.S. government. On Friday, Trump and his top campaign donor, Elon Musk, sent Musk's people over to the U.S. Institute of Peace, USIP, to go try to shut them down. And the people at USIP refused to let them in. And this is somehow how that went down. This is from the Washington Post, something we've been covering for the last few days. Friday, DOJ agents showed up at the USIP door with two others who said they were FBI agents, but did not further identify themselves. Noting that the building was not the property of the U.S. government, but owned by USIP, a registered nonprofit, and that its personnel were not federal employees, the Institute's officials asked if DOJ had a court order for admission. The DOJ agents acknowledged that they did not have a court order, and on Friday, they withdrew. Then this weekend, Sunday night, the longtime outside legal counsel for the Institute received a call from the head of the criminal division at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, newly appointed Jonathan Hornock. Hornock said his office was investigating suspicions of criminality at USIP. Suspicions of criminality? What? Hornock said Trump's newly appointed supposed directors of the Institute, including Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, would like to inspect the books and records of the Institute. Hornock said anyone who obstructs our efforts is subject to criminal investigation, according to one person familiar with the call. And again, no, in case you're wondering, no, this is not how prosecutors' offices are supposed to work, and this is not how prosecutors are supposed to talk. This is not the kind of work that prosecutors are supposed to do or ever do. Not in this country. But they used force of arms to get what they want. Threatened criminal prosecution and ultimately guns. According to the Washington Post, a private security company that works at that building was called by Doge and told that they would lose all of their federal contracts as a company if they did not help Doge personnel break into this building. Under that threat, these contractors then did help Doge force their way into the building. They forced their way in and then immediately went to the gun safe inside the building to get weapons. The Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police were also enlisted to help force Doge into the building, including, reportedly, picking the lock on the office's internal door. Now, the D.C. police, why were they there? They have now said in a statement that the reason they did what they did was, surprise, because they were directed to by Ed Martin. They said they got a call from Ed Martin at the Washington, D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office telling them to do it, and so they did it. So this is this bananas federal prosecutor's office in Washington, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, threatening federal criminal prosecution against private entities who don't do what Doge wants them to do. Doge has no authority over private entities. But Doge said they wanted in there, they wanted to break into that building, and they wanted to get access to everything in that building, so the federal prosecutor's office threatened criminal suspicion, criminal investigation, and criminal prosecution of that private entity for saying no. What did that letter say again? Dear Elon, after your referral, as is my practice, I will begin an inquiry. They are apparently using this part of the U.S. Justice Department as a private police force for the president's top campaign donor, when he is on private property going after a private entity. They are threatening federal criminal investigation and prosecution if you don't comply. And they're threatening to revoke contracts, revoke federal contracts of private armed security if private armed security doesn't join in the armed takeover of these private entities. And again, you may not care about the ins and outs of the U.S. Institute of Peace. You may not care about that one Citibank bank account, right? But what they are doing here is not about the outcomes they are seeking. What they're doing here is all about the power they are trying to exert. They are showing you what they think they have the power to do to you. In court today, the U.S. Institute of Peace was unable to get a restraining order to try to stop the efforts to shut down their nonprofit, their organization. But the judge hearing the case today in Washington expressed astonishment at what has just happened here, saying, quote, this conduct of using law enforcement, threatening criminal investigation, using armed law enforcement from 3 different agencies, probably terrorizing the employees and staff at the Institute, when there are so many lawful ways to accomplish the goals, why? The judge said, quote, why those ways here? The judge just exclaimed in court today, quote, that's a lot of law enforcement at a charitable institution's building. The judge questioned explicitly whether there was a way to accomplish the Trump administration's goals through legal procedures and through Congress, quote, without using the force of guns and threats by Doge against American citizens. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on right now. I recognize this is a fast-moving news environment. USA Today is reporting this evening that Trump's going to issue an executive order tomorrow to shut down the U.S. Department of Education, something that roughly 2/3 of the American public is opposed to. Trump's Attorney General, Pam Bondi, went on TV tonight and threatened 3 different federal judges by name. Another federal judge today blocked the Trump administration's efforts to force trans women into men's federal prisons. Another federal judge blocked them from unilaterally killing off money that Congress had appropriated for teacher training. In the insane case where Trump took 3 plane loads of people and shipped them to El Salvador with 0 processing at all, just grabbed them off the street, forced them onto a plane, and shipped them to a prison in another country without any hearing or legal determination at all. Now the Trump administration has been forced to admit that, quote, many of the people they did that to had no criminal record whatsoever. But nevertheless, they're in prison now, indefinitely in a foreign country, and we're not even allowed to know their names. We're not even allowed to know if any of them are, I don't know, U.S. citizens? There's a lot going on, and a lot of it is very hard fought and full of drama. But as much as we are watching all of those stories, those kinds of stories every day, we are also trying to keep our eyes on the sort of shadow stories in the boring corners. Because for now, that is where they are trying to seize truly breathtaking authoritarian power. Not in the future, but right now. And the courts, for now, are kind of, sort of, barely stopping it. For now. I'll stay on it.